So now, coming to the last set of the reasons responsible for the revolt are the military reasons. In the earlier part of this lecture, we had seen that the British used their mighty army to conquer many princely states in India. You must be remembering that, right? So the East India Company had its own army in India. But surprisingly, majority of the soldiers in that army were Indian sepoys or Indian soldiers and not European or British soldiers. So Indian soldiers were a major part of the British Indian army. But even though the Indian soldiers were a part of the British army, they were not treated well. As you can see the first point, it says the Indian sepoys were poorly paid, badly fed and ill treated. Thus we can see that if there are two soldiers, one is a British soldier and the other one is an Indian soldier in the same army at the same post, the Indian soldier was paid much less than the British soldier. Also, the Indian soldiers were not treated well. They were abused, they were sometimes beaten, and they were brutally treated by their seniors in the army. Thus, this poor treatment of Indian soldiers was a major reason. The second reason was that the crossing of sea was considered as a taboo, as a sin. In those times, it was regarded as one who crosses the sea and goes to another foreign land becomes impure. So, crossing the sea was not a good sign or was considered as a taboo in the then Indian society. But since Indian soldiers were a part of the British army, they had to cross the sea, the Indian Ocean, and go to other countries. Like once they were sent to Burma for the Anglo Burman War. Even though the soldiers did not want to cross the ocean, they were made to cross the ocean. And this hurt the religious sentiment of the soldiers. Now, the third and the immediate and most important reason for the outbreak of this revolt was the rumor of greased cartridges, as you can see in point number 3. The rifles or the guns that were used in those days by the soldiers were not like modern day guns. In those days, in order to shoot, the soldiers had to take a cartridge, bite off or break its seal with their teeth, and load the cartridge in the gun and then shoot. So there was a rumor in the military that these cartridges that were given to the soldiers had the fat of cows and pigs. This hurt the sentiments of soldiers in two ways. The rumor that it had the fat of cows hurt Hindus because cow is a holy animal for Hindus. And the rumor that it contained the fat of pigs hurt the sentiments of Muslim soldiers because pigs are considered impure by Muslims. So in this way, a majority of the soldiers in the British Indian Army were hurt by this rumor of greased cartridges. With this, we come to an end of the first part of our lecture, that is the reasons responsible for this revolt. We have seen 4 types of reasons: political reasons, economic reasons, cultural reasons, and military reasons. Next up, we will be looking at the spread of the revolt, that is, which all areas were affected by the revolt, which all areas were not, who were the leaders that led the revolt in different parts of India. So let us have a look. In the previous section, we saw how the Indian sepoys were poorly treated in the British army. They were paid much less than the British soldiers in the army. They were asked to cross the seas, and in the end, they were asked to bite off the cartridges that contained the fat of animals. So, because of all these reasons, the Indian sepoys in the army had been revolting for a long time. The period between 1757 to 1857 was already full of numerous sepoy mutinies, and even the revolt of 1857 began with a sepoy mutiny. On 29th of March 1857, Mangal Pandey, an Indian soldier, mutinied at Barakpur. He was hanged after a few days as a punishment. Almost after a month of Mangal Pandey's death, or more than a month after Mangal Pandey's death, on 10th May 1857, there was a Sepoy mutiny at Meerut. Now, see, just now we have discussed the case of greased cartridges. So, this was the reason for the mutiny in Meerut. The sepoys refused to use the grease cartridges, and the rebel sepoys who were imprisoned in jails were set free by these rebel soldiers who had mutinied. After freeing those soldiers, this group of rebel soldiers now started marching from Meerut to Delhi, and they reached Delhi on 11th of May, that is the next day. They decided to meet the Mughal ruler Bahadur Shah Zafar. Bahadur Shah Zafar was initially not very interested in joining these rebels because he was of quite old age by then and he had no such interest in joining the rebellion. But later, on the request of rebels and some notable soldiers, he agreed to join them. And on the next day, that is the 12th of May, the soldiers declared Bahadur Shah Zafar as the Emperor of India. And from this date, please mark this date, 12th of May, it is from here and this date that the rebellion started to spread in major parts of India. Now, declaring Bahadur Shah Zafar as the Emperor of India was an act of defiance in itself. Yes, Bahadur Shah Zafar was an old ruler by 1857 and he was not very capable to rule India, but by doing so, the Indian soldiers and Zafar wanted to show the British Raj that Britain is not the actual ruler of India and it is actually an Indian who can rule India. So, this was a symbolic rebellion by declaring him as the Emperor of India. And from here, the rebellion spread to some parts of India. Let us have a look which all parts were they. In Delhi, it was led by Bahadur Shah Zafar. In Kanpur, it was led by Nana Sahib. In Lucknow, it was led by Begum Hazrat Mahal and her son Birjis Qadr. In Jhansi, it was led by Rani Lakshmi Bai. In Faizabad, it was led by Maulvi Ahmadullah. In Bihar, it was led by Kunwar Singh. And in Bareilly, it was led by Bakht Khan. Now, here is a map showing the major centers of the 1857 revolt. Now, there is one thing that we can see in this map is that all the centers of the revolt are limited to North India in UP, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh and Delhi. There is no major center in South India or in Western India or in the Northeast India. So this revolt was quite limited in its spread. And why was it limited in its spread? We shall have a look. These are some of the major rebel leaders who led the revolt at various centers in India, like Bahadur Shah Zafar in Delhi, Rani Lakshmi Bai in Jhansi, Begum Hazrat Mahal in Lucknow, Tatya Tope Nana Sahib in Kanpur. As we saw in the map just now, that the revolt was limited in its spread. It could only cover major parts of North India. It could not spread to South India or Northeast India and so on. Why was it? It was because the East India Company started responding. It had decided to crush the revolt. Because the company knew if it did not react against the revolt, it could be overthrown from India. It could be driven away from India. As we discussed at the starting of this lecture, that many historians regard 1857 as the major and first serious attempt to overthrow the British rule. So the East India Company could have been driven away. And this is why the company brought more reinforcements from England. It brought more bullets, more soldiers, more guns to crush this rebellion. And with a very huge support of the British Army and the reinforcements, it started gaining its authority back. Very soon, the rebellion was being crushed, and it started with Delhi itself. Delhi was captured in September 1857. And who was the leader? Bahadur Shah Zafar. So quite naturally, Bahadur Shah Zafar was also captured and he was sent to a jail in Burma. The old, weak Mughal ruler spent the rest of his life in the jail and he died in 1862. The next big center was Lucknow. Lucknow also was captured in 1857 itself. The leader there, Begum Hazrat Mahal, escaped to Nepal. Jhansi was captured in June 1858. The leader there, the brave Rani Lakshmi Bai, was killed in a war. Tatya Tope continued the war and he was killed in April 1859. Kunwar Singh of Bihar died due to natural causes. So, as we can see, it was not easy for the company to crush the rebellion. It took almost 2 years to crush the revolt, and this shows the bravery with which the rebels had fought the East India Company. Also, we have highlighted this point many a times that the rebellion did not spread to major parts of India. Why was it? It was also because there was a section in the society that was loyal to the British, who was against these rebels. So these loyal landlords and the royal princely states were rewarded by the British East Indian Company. And those who surrendered in front of the company and had not killed any British were rendered safe. They were not given any punishments. So the rebellion was crushed and the loyalists were rewarded. This was the response of the East India Company. Now, coming to the last part of our lecture is the changes that took place after the revolt. Now, once the revolt was crushed, the British government or the government in Britain was not very happy with the administration of the East India Company in India. The argument given was that the East India Company is very ineffective and incapable to rule India, and that is why the revolt of 1857 took place. As a result, the British Parliament passed the Government of India Act 1858. What was in this act passed by the British Parliament? The act transferred the power of East India Company to the British Crown. That is, now India will not be ruled by the East India Company but will be ruled by the Queen of England, that is Queen Victoria herself. Queen Victoria now became the actual ruler of India. One thing that must be kept in mind here is that the entire British Raj or the British period that we study was not ruled by Britain or the Crown itself. Company, the East India Company, ruled India from 1757 to 1857, and from 1857 to 1947 it was the British Crown or Queen Victoria who ruled India. So apart from ending the authority of East India Company and handing it over to the Crown, another change that was brought by this act was that a separate post of Secretary of State for India was created. Now this secretary did not live in India and was appointed and he lived in Britain itself. But the duty of this secretary was to look after all the affairs that were going on in India. And he was assisted by a council in his work. Next change that was brought by the Government of India Act 1858 was that the post of Governor General of India now came to be known as Viceroy. Remember, while we were talking about or discussing about the doctrine of lapse, I had said it was brought by the Governor General of India because till 1856 or till 1857, the head in India was called the Governor General, but now he came to be known as the Viceroy of India. So the first Viceroy of India was Lord Canning, and he was the successor of Dalhousie in India. We had also discussed that there were a lot of princely states that were unhappy with the East India Company, either because of the doctrine of lapse or because of the way they were conquered and annexed. So these princely states, their authority was restored to them, and the British Crown now established very friendly relations with these princely states. Another change that was brought in was that the doctrine of lapse was abolished. The adopted sons could now become rulers. They could now succeed the throne, even though they were adopted. However, these rulers, and that is almost all the princely states in India, were supposed to recognize British Crown as their ruler. That is, they were to be subordinated by the British Crown. Another major section that had revolted against the British were the Indian Sepoys. We have discussed a little while ago how badly the Indian Sepoys were treated in the army. They were not paid well, they were abused, and they were not at all treated well. So, in order to solve this problem, the proportion of Indian soldiers was reduced in the army and that of European soldiers was increased. That is, let us take a hypothetical example that out of 100 soldiers, earlier there were 50 Indian soldiers and 50 European soldiers. Now, this ratio was even reduced. Now there were around 30 Indian soldiers and 70 European soldiers. By reducing the number of Indian soldiers, Britain wanted to establish its supremacy, its domination, and control over the Indians. Also, we had seen that another major reason was the interference of Britain in the cultural matters of India. Britain had decided to bring in reforms by abolishing sati or widow remarriage. But this interference did not go down well with the Indian population and they revolted. So the British administration decided not to interfere in the religious and cultural matters. They decided to maintain a distance from these matters and did not consider them to reform. We also saw that there was a section of society that was loyal towards the British. So the British Crown now started making policies that could protect the landlord, and in this way they were rewarded of their loyalty towards the. With this, we come to an end of our lecture. In this chapter, we studied the reasons for the revolt, the political reasons, economic reasons, cultural reasons, and the military reasons. Next, we saw the areas to which the revolt had spread, who were the leaders, which all areas were not affected by the revolt. We next saw what was the East India Company's response and how the revolt was crushed. At the last, we saw the changes that were brought in after the revolt was crushed. So from now on, the East India Company was abolished and the entire administration of India was taken up by the British Crown itself. With this, our lecture comes to an end. Thank you.